wasn't much of this yesterday, actually. I think about the way Sunday at least used to be like a real big news day with the big newspapers. When I worked at bookstores, I'm not happy about the light. When I worked at bookstores, we sold newspapers too, and we had regular customers for like the New York Times and a few for the Washington Post, which at that time was not owned by a billionaire. I don't know much about the history of the Washington Post. I think I have seen some things about in the past, some things not being real helpful to you. I no longer have a subscription to the New York Times. I discontinued. It's biased, and it's also for fluent people. All right, so I don't know how to put it in words very well, but those biases really have an impact when people don't see everything that's going on and start to think. It's something to think about. People start to sort of shape their thinking around bias that they've picked up from reading journalism that has some kind of reputation, that has a little shine on it or something like that. It's hard to know how to put it into words, but yeah, I don't. And I don't have that anymore, and I can't even read. I don't want to read articles now. I saw some real bad photojournalism several years ago. It was like, wow, about food insecurity, and it's like, no, no, So I don't read much mainstream news. I read independent journalism when I read journalism usually, and what I tend to do is just glance. Although I do have something, well, yeah, there is, there is independent journalism where I read articles. All right, but so I've got a bunch of tabs pulled up right now. And, I continue going through emails and newsy kind of stuff, and it's like, why do I feel like I need to read it? Why do I feel like I need to do that? And it's strange to me thinking about this. All right, I don't want to use these two words together, news culture. Well, unless I'm saying news and culture. News and culture is two different things. But news can suppress culture. News can put too much attention on culture to where then culture gets used by people that don't have it. You know, uh, and yeah, well, there also can be journalism. I'm not saying journalism is a bad thing, and I have noticed in some news or journalism how journalists have been journalists are sometimes targeted and politically and things like that and killed, and yeah, it's just unreal. All right, so but I'm asking myself, why do I feel the need to read it? Well, I think about at school and at home. So, for example, seventh grade social studies, it was current events. That was the whole year. It was current events. And what is that if it doesn't have some relationship to news? All right. There's a question. And at home, news tended to be on at dinner time. And sometimes the TV was like right there. Well, news was on at dinner time if the TV was in the kitchen. And I'm trying to remember when all we had a TV in the kitchen. But it was there. I feel like the whole time I was in middle school it was Middle East, Middle East, Middle East. And I really feel like that's mostly what I picked up from news when I was growing up. I know there were things on when I was a young child and things like that, but as far as like a real big topic, it was Middle East, and there was a little bit of other stuff here and there, and things where you just know, yeah, you don't, that's crossing that line. Of course, no one would ever do that. Thinking about when I use the word international conflicts, I'm talking about countries. All right, so what can I say? at home there was some emphasis on it. Did my parents read it and talk about it in an intellectual way? I don't think so. Did they? I don't want to comment on much, really. I just think about it being on, and there might be a comment about that was a bad decision, or things like that, but and I'm not sure that I even really knew what the commentary was about exactly, but the news was on, and again at school, and I think about when going through school, was there an emphasis on things like that? At least seventh grade, but I think about in classes and where we're sort of, I don't know, what's the word? Critical thinking skills are emphasized and things like that. I mean, there also was a class when I was in sixth grade that was critical thinking, and I've talked about that before. It's like I didn't even know what critical thinking was. I didn't feel like I understood the class, and all I remember was one of my classmates and seeing it in the top of his underoos with and my brothers wore underoos, but I didn't understand what critical thinking was, and I for sure didn't think I was good at it. And I think all through school I didn't think I was good at it, but I do think I'm at least over decades developed skills in critical thinking. Uh, so yeah, I don't know. I mean, I prefer living from my heart. Can those two things kind of? I mean, there could be some stress. I mean, I think about my first husband saying you think too much, and it's like, I mean, I'm sorry. You know, I'm sorry that you feel that way. And then I think about him saying he was never in love with me when we separated. And yeah, well, I get a pain all on my arm saying that. But yeah, well, what is that? Maybe a nerve. Anyhow, so yeah, why do I feel like I should read the news? Why do I feel like I need to read the news? This is just something to think about. And thinking about it in a republic, thinking about the way what happens at school, what happens at home, and what happens over generations. You know, Parents learning things at school, they teach their children by example. It's something to think about again. But yeah, it's not terrible in a way. Having things to read, because what else do I do? What else do I do? I mean, as far as work, there are younger people who need the kinds of jobs that I would probably occupy, low paying, somewhat menial jobs, because I mean, I don't mind doing work like that, and I'm not wanted anywhere else, but I don't like the way I'm treated. And physically, no. If I were doing something, I mean, I could do, I could do some things, that I could say somewhat skilled, and I can learn things, I could do apprentice type work, learn things, and yeah, some of that I feel like that's been some of my adult life actually. Although some of those things I don't do, but I learned things in that sort of capacity. So anyway, some of those things I don't have the equipment, I don't have the credentials, but I learned things, learned skills, and yeah. Well, anyway, I just thought I'd talk about it. Why do we read news? It really, I mean, I can get real overwhelmed. It's like, it's stressful, and it's stressful to not have contact with people when I I think about if I think about different men I've been married to and lived with, I could do that. All right, so the person I lived with that was physically abusive, I mean, it was, I want to say, a constant stream of insults coming from him, and I'm kind of stoic. So, but he's a musician, so there's creativity there, there's arts there, I kind of think of myself as a visual artist. So, you know, what words do I want to use to describe what that was like? I thought of him as a friend. I I didn't really understand. I mean, he was my boyfriend, and yeah. So, but there was creativity. All right, he was a musician. I have, can I say I have training in music? I mean, I think I can say that. I'm, an artist too. So, did we talk about things? I mean, not much. I don't think so. I don't think so. It was more me working, him doing whatever he was doing, sometimes working, sometimes not. Um, me making stuff, him playing music. We go out to eat some and things like that. Sometimes go to a party, something like that. Not like those parties when we were a little bit younger. But I wouldn't say it was real intellectual between he and I, but it was creative. My first husband, he's creative. He's a musician, and he also is a computer whiz. Uh, and yeah, did we talk about things like news? No, nothing like that. Did we talk about? No, but we were pretty good together for a few years until he wanted a child and I didn't. So the person I lived with after that, yeah, we talked about things like that. And I really liked that. We would watch things, we would talk. We would watch things, we would talk. We would do things. We wrote a letter together one time. There were things like that. We didn't see everything quite the same way. We had different life experiences, but there was that. There was that. Uh, kind of. I don't know what word to use. It was. That was satisfying. I liked that. Could I mean, but his family didn't like me enough for us to be married. So, and he can be a little condescending sometimes, but he's a really good person. Then, all right, that my second husband. Did we talk about things? Not as much as we went out and were outdoors. He's an artist too, and you know, and uh, and the person I had lived with, where we talked about stuff. Well, I mean, he has some background in music and stuff like that too, but as a kind of a science person. So, but second husband, yeah. So, did we talk about things? I mean, I did. I could run my mouth and I could just, be real intense about things, and he didn't like that. I would get intense. I would be like, and I probably had that rhythm going, da 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 da, and da da da, and he didn't like it, and 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 like one of his brothers would say something, and he would either let me or I would hear it, and he would know what my reaction was going to be, and I would sometimes defend him as far as his family, and da 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 da, that kind of, and but did we talk about things? No, but early on, not much. Not much, but I did, but it wasn't really much dialogue. But he wanted a book about Bartram's travels early on, and I got him that book. I special ordered it for his birthday, and then I read it first because he had something else to do. So, yeah. But anyway, but yeah, so anyhow, I don't know why I'm talking about that, but just, you learn habits, and one of those things for me, I think, was paying attention to at least a certain amount of news, something like that, and then the critical thinking, I feel like there was some, how do I want to describe that, schooling in that, formal education, is public school formal education? Yeah, I mean, but, thinking K-12, you know, uh, it is, I think, and it's important to think about the effects of that. I mean, it can shape the way we think. It can shape the way we relate to people. It can shape the way we go about our day. Many things like that. We lose culture, and there are things like that that have gone on over generations, and it's important to pay attention to that too. But yeah, just some words about news, looking at news, feeling like, why do I feel like I need to read about this? And yeah, well, again, at least something to do. I can have so much open. It's like now I feel kind of stressed, and then I don't have anyone. I mean, I'm talking to people. I don't have anyone talking to me. um, yeah. Well, anyhow, that's why I listen, I guess, to people. And anyhow, may your day be filled with not an overwhelming amount of news. Sorry, I can't talk. May your day be not filled with an overwhelming amount of news, but enough intellectual stimulation if you need that, and if not, things that make your heart feel good.